right now. Okay.
Okay, we're starting. So here we go. Taking you around to Bridget Sexauer's piece.
Yes, that, yeah, so yeah, she is a marine electrician. And let's see, I wrote something down about her, which I can't find right now, but that's okay. But I did look up her work after I chose her work for the show, and I couldn't find a website, but she has a lot of Instagram photos. I'll have to follow her. And just with this large, very consistent body of work that's really interesting, and just places these like hard metal objects and gives them this life, sort of collaged in a way with other pieces and textures, and very interesting work, I thought. Oh, and I'm glad you have the statements next to the pieces too. That's great.
Yeah.
Andy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, next I'm going to take you to, this is a actually quite large piece by Elise Wagner.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I remember this piece really well. It's called Pluto Atlas 3, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a beautiful piece. It's so textural. Well, her work is, I'm familiar with her work already, and it's just, you know, beautiful encaustic textures. It's like she excavates through the wax to create these wonderful sort of map-like structures. I'm wild about it, and I love the way that she has these two, I don't know if they're rectangles or squares, I forget, next to each other, the very dark and the very light. And I know that the encaustic is getting a lot of glare right now, but she really, the contrast is great with these large organic forms and then these mechanical lines drawn into the wax. And I mean, technically, in terms of encaustic, these pieces are just phenomenal. And they're just, you know, with that glow, with that orange, it just sort of comes on fire. It's just really, really beautiful.
Mm-hmm. That's a great piece.
Yeah, I know that she's worked with themes of astronomy and geology for a long time. Oh, it just turned the other way. I liked it that way too.
I just started to think that this would be a better way.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. All right, we'll move over to Josh Sand's piece.
Oh yes, Josh. Yeah, I remember seeing his work in the Bridge exhibition last year. So it was a series of signs that he did in conjunction with LTD, which is Lane Transit System here in Eugene, the bus system. And this is actually a watercolor. I don't know if he would call it a prototype or whatever for one of the signs. And I remember this sign that he made from this original piece, depression, walking the path, quality of life, walking path. I just thought they were just such great commentaries on life.
Yeah, this is great.
And maps, of course, mapping.
Yeah, this idea of taking a map that would normally have names of streets and locations, he's sort of labeling them with other things that are there for most people, but don't talk about.
Right, right.
All right, let's head over to Niraj Aloran's piece. Now this is quite large.
Yeah, isn't it about 5 by 6 feet or somewhere around there? quilting piece. I think she called it pierced technique, and I'm not sure what that is because I don't know much about quilting, but I know that she looks at very microscopic organisms, as well as photographs from the Hubble spacecraft. And I thought this was quite an impressive quilt. And I'm not drawn to a lot of quilts that I see, but I definitely was drawn to her work. It just had a real unique perspective in terms of quilts. So
you see this force in her work.
Yeah, lots
force
of
of motion.
Right, motion. Yes. And it's interesting looking at these pieces in the gallery now, as opposed to just looking at them on the cafe site. And I'm just seeing them in a whole different way now. And it's such a, honestly, technology is wonderful. We all love technology sometimes. And in another way, you can't see, technology makes it possible, right, to especially during the pandemic, to be able to judge a show and, long distance. But when you're judging a show just from these digital images on a computer screen, there's just so much more to the, piece. You don't see them in space. You can't really see a lot of texture. And of course, you can't see the pieces interacting with each other. But so it's wonderful for me right now to see them in the gallery too.
Yeah, they come alive in a different kind of way. And I think that's the thing that we miss when we are not able to go to the galleries right now, is that the aliveness that happens in work that you see in person. And then when you light the work and all those colors start to come out, it's a very different experience.
Uh-huh.
All right, we're going to move over now to KK Whipple's piece.
Yeah, I had never seen her work before. Thought it was really unique. I'd still like to be able to see this piece in person, and all of them actually, but this was a musical instrument, which I thought was amazing. And I'm wondering what kind of sound it makes. I have no idea what you would call this instrument. Do you know anything about her work, Sandy? Have you seen her work before?
I have not seen KK Whipple's work before. When this piece came unboxed, because as you know, many of the pieces were shipped to us. Uh-huh. And when this piece came unboxed, it was very striking in that I have never seen this silhouette before. It is, as you said, a very unique piece. And I've never seen this particular artist. And it's funny because you see so many artists working, and when you see something that's just so out of what you normally see, it really is striking. But this is definitely an artist to take a look at. Were you able to look at their website? Did they have a website?
I couldn't find this one. Okay. So yeah, a lot of the artists that I chose, I went back later and looked at, their larger bodies of work, because, I was really curious and I wanted to see how the particular pieces that they entered fit in with their body of work. And that was so interesting. I really, I love the process. I really got to see a lot of new, some familiar work, and then a lot of new work that I was unfamiliar with. And there were a lot of entries from, far and wide within the U.S., far and wide within the U.S. And so got to see some new work, which was really interesting. Oh yeah, it just looks beautifully crafted.
Oh yeah, it's so well done. I wish you could see this in person, Tally. I mean, this is, hours and hours of time, not to mention the time it took to conceptualize something like this.
Right, right.
But there's painting and drawing in there and just a lot of information. It's a piece you can spend a long time with.
Yeah.
And then do you remember this piece?
Yes, I do. Refresh me of the name of the artist.
Okay. This is Keith Buswell. And this one's an intaglio print. And it's called Pisa. So Keith Buswell. And I'm just going to get up really close. We have had a few visitors to the gallery, and this has been a favorite. There's an intimacy to the piece, and then you have this like layering on top of like this kind of wallpaper-ish fabric.
Yeah, which in the original slide was not there at all. It was just the image of the etching, the intaglio piece, and that was it. Not even the paper. So this is the whole new presentation, and it's interesting. It's really different. I've never seen a piece presented, an etching, like a simple etching presented in this particular way. And what's interesting too is that it's like off center, like the right side is, and I'm sure he intentionally did that. And it's really odd, but there's something about it that really engages me because of the oddness of it. It sort of goes with the image. It's sort of surreal and different and strange.
Absolutely. And the vulnerability that you see in that little curl of the paper on the right side, and it is awkward and
awkward.
Yeah, and in that way it's easy to connect with, It's easy to connect with that. All right, I'm going to take you around to Everett Cane. This is Everett Cane's piece. Quite a bit of light on this because we've got these back windows open, so hopefully you can see. But
right,
this is Everett Cane's, and it's an untitled piece.
Yeah,
and he says this works examine cultural madness. Does that ring a bell?
Yes. I remember looking his work up, and I actually made some notes about his work. That I can't find right now. But his website was really interesting. Just the really unique work. I think he's from New York. Sorry, I can't find my notes on him right now. Yeah, he's a New Yorker. I think his address was in Manhattan, I think. And examines, like his other work on his website examines surveillance, cinema. I know this is an archival pigment print, and which most of his work is that I could find. Yes. Definitely very emotional. His faces, his figures are just really sort of bring up a lot of maybe hard to deal with emotional images of people, of torture. I know he deals with torture in animals too, with animals. So his work is very intense. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'll bring you over to Sophie Henry's piece.
Yeah. Oh, it's good to see this piece in the more real, not quite real.
Yeah.
You have to calm down. How long is this show up for, Sandy? I forget. Is it a month?
It'll be up until July 6th.
Okay.
So we've got a few more weeks. So if you can come down, Tally, that would be great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd like to be able to do that.
Okay. So I'm going to scooch over to, that was Sophie Henry's piece. And then this one is a sculptural work by Marilyn Perry.
Hmm.
And she's trying to soothe the senses. A lot of comforting or dealing with uncomfortable topics and emotions. But here, Marilyn is really trying to create a space where there is this kind of soothing form.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, it definitely is. It's a beautiful piece. It's great to see you travel around it too, because, you know, sculpture is so hard to really get a sense of what it's like in a still photograph, of course.
It's almost bone-like, you know, you feel like it's part of the body.
Mm-hmm. I feel like we should have music going on.
I know.
Yeah.
Just so you can see. And then we'll take a look over here at Nancy Watterson Sharp's piece. This is quite a large painting. I'll zoom in here.
Zoom in on the Zoom.
Zoom in the Zoom.
Now, is she's a Portland artist, I think, right?
No, actually, she's from here. She lives in Elkton, and she's actually on the gallery committee. She's a wonderful human being, and I appreciate her so much. And then she brought these pieces in, and she always blows me away. You know, this conflation of nature and culture and sort of how things grow or don't together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very nice. It's good to see that piece too.
I believe she's got a show coming up at it's the governor's exhibit.
Oh,
Salem. She was selected to do work up there. So I know she's madly painting in her studio right now.
Great.
Let's see here. Let's go to Victoria Shepherd's piece. I'm going to come up close because I don't think you can see, and I don't think you were able to see the textures while you were looking at this.
Interesting textures.
But look at that.
Yeah, I think she talked wow, that's interesting. I think she talked about in her statement the, you know, exploration by ship and, you know, centuries ago, and all the debris that's left, you know, all the storms that wrecked many ships, and the debris that's left inside the, you know, within the ocean floor. And I just thought this was a really interesting piece. It's so abstract in some ways, and then you have this human-made structure right down of the ship, the wrecked ship, down in the corner. But it has a wonderful light too.
It does. I mean, you almost feel like the gallery lights are lighting up that top part, but it's really not. It's what she's got illuminating the materials, the way that she's used them, so that it feels like there's that light coming through.
Mm-hmm. Now, is this an acrylic painting or an oil painting?
Now, this is mixed media. So she's not, I don't think she's using oils, but I know that there's sand in her work, there's paper in her work. So in some ways you can think of it as like a layered piece of different materials. There's paint in there, of course. Yeah, she might be using some oils. That's what it looks like down here. When you get to the dip, it really is.
Oh yeah, I can see where she sort of did some collage work. Yeah, that's really interesting. I have to say, as an artist, when I'm in a museum or gallery and I see a label and it says mixed media, all
Yeah.
it tells me is nothing.
Yeah, I know.
You know, it's like, wait a minute, will you just tell me what you made this out of? You know, I'd like to know. Yeah, I know that's like a pet peeve of mine. You know, it's like, I get it, you know, mixed media, you know, there's a lot of different things in the work, but I would like to know more about the medium than just say mixed media. But this is a beautiful piece. I mean, I know a lot of people do that, and you know, it's acceptable and everything, but I just wanted to put that little plug in for, you know, what's it made out of?
Yeah,
You know,
well,
what
you know,
materials do you use?
I
Because,
actually have to take responsibility there because this tag that's on the side of her painting really does go into some of the materials that she uses. And I think it's just the gallery format that doesn't allow people to put all the things that they need to. She's actually putting quite a bit of stuff in here. She says that she's building the canvas. She thinks of it as building it. And she's using strips of metal, organic leaves and sticks, clay, slip, images from books,
oh,
acrylic color. So she is using acrylic.
wow.
And she's even, she said she's using the sand to sort of build up that surface. So yeah, she's trying to get that sort of power of the earth kind of feeling from this. And I think she's quite good at that.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, she does go into it in her explanation of the work. So I apologize there.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So she did tell us, she did give us a lot of information. That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
I always find it, you know, inspiring to know how people built things and make things. And oh yeah, and this is a beautiful piece.
This is Lauren Lake's piece, Swath 1. And I'll get up close because I think it's really hard to see on Zoom.
Right.
And then there's glass on top of it. So it's going to be a little bit hard to see what's going on. But I think you can get the gist. And I think when you were looking at this, you knew.
Right. So it's a cyanotype and an intaglio print, if I remember correctly. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe so.
It's a beautiful piece. I'm going to have to come down and see it.
Yeah. All right, let's move over to Barbara Martin's piece. She's using acrylic, charcoal, and pencil on a cradled panel. So she's got, that's a good example of not saying mixed media.
Right. Yeah.
But it is mixed media, and you can see it when you get up to these paintings.
Right.
The chalk and the drawing and the painting.
Yeah, I thought this was a really unique piece. And, you know, it's sort of fun and goofy and serious at the same time. That's how it struck me. And it looks like the surface, you know, all these different things that she puts on the panel. It looks like the surface is interesting. It looked that way anyway in the photograph, and I think that's true.
Yeah, it is true. It's actually
it's really
yeah. It's quite humorous.
Yeah.
It's got humor in it.
Yes, which is so important. And you don't come across a lot of art that is really successfully humorous. And I really appreciate that. Humor is essential, especially right now.
Absolutely. Tally, do you think artists help bring out emotions and things that that help us survive in their work?
That help us survive? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like each one of these pieces really sort of gave me, you know, I mean, as an artist, you know, I get so into my own vision, my own way of seeing things. And so I think during this show was really, really a good experience for me, because it, you know, just took me out of my head and got me into how, what other artists were saying. I mean, I look at other art, but I think when you judge a show, it's really, it's a different experience, because you have to look closely and you're making all these decisions, and, you know, you just kind of get into all these different, minds of the artists, and you know, that take you different places, and you know, got me out of my own little tunnel, which I think is really important. And does that sort of speak to your question, I hope?
It does. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, and look at this artist book. This is just beautiful. And you know, this is another thing that I really couldn't see very well in the images. I mean, to really see this book in images, it would probably take about 20 photographs, you know. But it looks like it's beautifully crafted. And could you, Sandy, remind me of the title of this one?
Sure. It's called La Deray, and it's by Samantha Osborne and Alan Picaro. So it's a collaborative piece, and it's inspired by the French philosopher Henry Bergson's interrogated concepts of time and consciousness. And so as you get a little closer, you're going to see puncture holes, some kind of braille-like, on top of the imagery. Tally, this is just a great piece. I can see.
Wow. Yeah.
You know, and then you've got those shadows that are actually creating other pages in some ways and other shapes and forms.
Right. Right.
It's
Oh,
stunning.
this is a beautiful book. I really like the undulating sort of irregular edges, and these sort of diagrams that she uses with these larger abstract surfaces. So it just has a beautiful rhythm, and not she, he together collaborate. And yeah, the punctures are really interesting. The patterns and the punctures, and the way the light comes through.
Absolutely. It's like that absence has a presence. And this is just a pretty stunning work.
Can you tell me where these artists are from? I can't recall.
I can't, but I can, you know, when we put out the information about the show, we can let people know where the artists are from. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure where these artists are from.
I love seeing collaborative work too.
Oh gosh.
Great.
And then we have
one. Oh, and there's Renee Couture's piece. It's called Let Me Lie Down on a Hillside. Oh, no, I don't have the title quite right. Lie Down on an Open Hillside? Let's see. I really love this piece.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. It's a sculptural piece, and it's on the floor. I don't know if people can see that. It is called, I'll help you out, Tally.
I want to lie upon an open hillside.
Yep, number one.
Upon. No, yeah, upon an open hillside, right? Yeah.
She says that this is an artist-designed wallpaper. So Renee designed this wallpaper. So let's go down. I'll take you guys, because if you're not in here, you cannot see this.
Oh yeah, that's good. And actually, I couldn't even see the detail in the photographs that well as I can see them now, and see the whole sort of landscapey texture of the piece.
And then she's got, you know, these wooden flowers. They're gold-leafed or flocked. So it's as if some of the plants in the wallpaper are sort of making their way outside of the wallpaper, right? Escaping that prescribed space to have a life of their own. So, goodness gracious. So you can see, Tally, it is an amazing show. And
yeah,
I mean, really, you did such a wonderful job. And it's amazing to see so many artists that we have not seen before. I think that was the thing about doing the national call, was in some ways for us to put in context, in some ways, what we're thinking about in terms of those intersections between, you know, technology and art and culture, thinking about that as in an expanded view, you know, not just what people are doing in the Pacific Northwest, but what are they thinking about within this framework across the country.
Yeah, I think it makes for a much more interesting show for, you know, our region, for people to see things brought in from other places, you know, from all the coasts. And yeah, now this was a really interesting piece. I think this is made of cardboard, right? Am I right? Like,
oh yeah, that's corrugated cardboard.
And you know, I wasn't sure about this piece, but the more I looked at it, the more I thought, you know, this is really it's a unique piece. And please, I can't off the top of my head, I can't remember the artist's name.
It's Sandy Sanders, and it's called A Freeway.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in terms of what the show and the call was about, she really is really in there thinking about the relationship of technology and nature, culture, all of those things. And so she's really kind of combining things in kind of an interesting way. I love this piece. I got to tell you, Tally.
Great.
I mean, look at,
yeah,
some of these details are just killer.
Oh, that's wonderful. All the little landscapes down in there. And I think I remember her stating that she used all recycled materials and paints and things like that. And yeah, it's just ingeniously built.
Absolutely.
Of course, I love the bicycles. I love to bike. Okay.
I know. So this is Amy Terrell, and I lingered on this piece before, but so this is Amy's piece, and it's kind of fun to see Amy's piece with Renee's piece, because you've got this kind of patterning, this sort of idea that you could block nature away with some kind of gate, but that it's always going to sort of take over, right? But this is great. This is another, you know, collage piece. There's some like pieces of origami in here. It's just really wonderful. And the drawing is great. Yes.
And I remember looking at all three of her works and thinking, I don't know which one to choose, but that one looks good. And that's sort of one of the larger ones. I think that the size of that is about 3 feet wide, maybe.
It is, yeah. It's quite wide. And this one is Laura Benedetti, and this one's called Fern Dance. And it looks to be on separate panels that are kind of fastened together.
So it's sort of one big panel with like 9 different panels fastened together. That's what I sort of saw or thought.
Yes.
And refresh my memory, I can't remember the techniques that she's using. Monoprint? Am I wrong?
No, this looks like a monoprint. Let me quickly. She's new to printmaking, she says. This is a monoprint.
And then she must mount the prints on boards and then put the boards together.
That's right. That's right. When we put the piece up, you could see that the boards were fastened together. I mean, the whole piece is built. It's all built. I just love this kind of how the piece illuminates, you know, around that center image. And then these kind of ghost ferns that are happening.
Yeah. So are those, is it just pretty much bare paper, or is it sealed in any way? It's hard for me to tell from the slide.
It does, you know, it's very matte when you're looking at it. It doesn't look sealed, but I could be wrong. There is a little bit of a sheen on top of this. She may have sealed it with something. I can't tell from her tag what she what she did exactly and what that process was.
Right. Yeah, I'm always curious when people use paper and they don't put it under glass and they finish it with certain materials, and it's really it's really in many ways nice not to look through glass at a piece sometimes. I mean,
Absolutely.
me being a printmaker, doing a lot of work under glass, it's something that I always wrestle with, and I
Mhm.
want to put it under glass, but I fooled around with different things, wax and different sealants. But anyway, so this piece.
This is Jody Patterson, and this is acrylic sand astroturf on board. So she's really kind of combining a lot of different elements in this, and it's a diptych. I mean, this is one piece, just so people know, when you have a diptych, it's sort of separate pieces making one whole, or two pieces making a whole. And so this is Jody's piece. And then I'll bring you over to Victoria's piece, MV Moran. We've seen her work here before.
Uh-huh.
And, just as stunning as her work has ever been, is these large drawings. It's about an 8-foot drawing, 2 feet wide, of this just wonderful figure. And it's called Replicants, 2 of 2. And it's great. She's like Zentangling in here. But it's only in a section,
Right.
She's just such an expert at like carrying your eye through a drawing.
Yes.
Your eye just keeps moving from top to bottom. And then, and then you're just also really grateful for those restful spaces. And now I'll bring you over to the video by Lindsey Garcia. I mean, you can't see this in person, and I'm not sure how this is coming across, but this is just absolutely an incredible piece.
Cheese balls. Yeah, cheese balls are like just the epitome of, fake food, technologically manipulated food.
Yeah.
I think actually the night I watched this video one evening a couple times, and somehow cheese balls came into my dreams. So I I don't know. It was just so funny. And so I went back and looked at this piece again, and I thought, yeah, I definitely need to accept this piece into the show, because it definitely, found a place in my mind. And I don't know if I could really articulate why yet, but it did.
Oh, it does. I mean, I think you just described it beautifully, Tally. I feel exactly the same. I can sit and watch this. I've watched it quite a number of times.
Oh, really?
And I just want to keep watching it.
I love the cheese powder residue on the fingers.
Yes. And this notion of like, why do we do things? We do them because we choose to do them. They might be silly, but sometimes they're serious, but we do them anyway. And so it's just wonderful to have a movie surrounding this idea of these cheese balls. And these women that are carrying these cheese balls and trying to put them in places. And it's pretty poignant video, although it is funny. It's a lot of things. And I think that's maybe, Tally, was that something that you noticed in the work when you were choosing it, that there are a lot of complex relationships to the work? Some of them are funny and humorous, but also dealing with really serious issues. Right.
The scope of takes on this theme is just infinite. And it was so interesting to see how different artists approached the theme, so many differences. I mean, look at this, cheese balls. And then, and some of the pieces I think that we still haven't seen yet, like Kathy Capario's piece, Patterns of Privilege.
Let's head over there. I'll take you. Let's talk about that piece.
Right.
There we go.
Yeah, and I have to say, you know, I have seen Kathy's work over the years. Kathy lives here in Eugene, and I've seen her work in various places, not just Eugene. But she just has this very ingenious way of crafting the work, and it through the years it's evolved. So she's using collage, she uses spray paint and stencils and this plastic Yupo paper to make stencils out of, and then she paints over that, and she cuts things out and exposes the wood beneath. And so you get this sort of multifaceted, multi-layered kinds of texture and kinds of painting, and then with the wood showing through. I think it's a fairly new thing, maybe the last 2 or 3 years, where she'll actually use the wood of the panel that she's working on, cutting out silhouettes. And yeah, I'm a fan. I have to say. And you know, Kathy's work is so so extra super relevant right now. You know, she talks about being a white woman in our culture, sort of trying to figure out her relationship to, you know, history and the land and our culture, and, you know, sort of being involved in a conversation about navigating that. And I know she's someone that really is always working and always thinking and always involved in discussions about what's going on, you know, in our country in terms of racial strife right now and for a while. So her work just has all these different layers of meaning too.
It does. There's a seeking in her work, you know, and thinking about wallpaper and the patterns of thinking, and thinking about racism and how it's sort of become part of the structure, or it has been the structure out of which we have operated for so long. And she's sort of ripping through that, and she's seeking another kind of conversation. And I know Kathy too, and it's just really amazing to see her. She's been doing this for a while, and you're right, the work is super relevant right now. I mean, you've got names in this piece. Trayvon Martin is in there, and Freddie Gray, and Michael Brown, Philando Castile, Walter Scott. She's really saying those names. She's putting them in the wallpaper as being part of the foundation of the piece. It's great. What a topical piece right now. So happy to see that in here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, Sarah Gru's work.
Sarah Gru.
Yes, space, and let's see if I can remember the name of this.
This one is Sea and Stars, Jellyfish Galaxy. She's a cyanotype on paper mounted on panel.
Yeah, I actually went on Sarah's website and looked at her entire series of this that she had up on the website, and it is just stunning. I have to say that she's really this series, she just hit the nail on the head. It really speaks of the microcosm and the macrocosm. And I mean, the panel on the left is this sea plankton, this very fragile microscopic organism. And I know she did a residency, a marine research vehicle through Sitka Center for Art and Ecology. I was on the boat for 10 days. And I haven't spoken with her directly about that residency. but I know all this work came out of that residency, and it's just gorgeous work. I just really love this series.
Yeah, I love, Tally, that you picked these pieces, and her title. I mean, she's really just getting to that point, which is, you know, the sea and the stars, and she's drawing this direct line with what's above and what's down below, and that it's all this sort of one place. Gosh, I love artists so much. Tally, my phone is probably going to die here really soon. I'm sorry, but I'm just going to take you into my office now, if you don't mind, so I can ask you a couple questions. Oh, before I do that, though, I'm worried about my phone. I want to show you this piece by Cara Donatelli.
Oh, right.
One thing, I'm not sure if you knew this, but we found out when we got the piece that these chain links are ceramic pieces.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
The whole thing is made by hand. And then you come down to these sort of papered, I don't know if you can see that, but it's almost as if it's dragging the wall, or the wall is dragging them. We're not sure.
Uh-huh.
Tell me maybe why you had thought about this piece as being, why you wanted this in the show.
You know, I really have to think about that. I love it. Was drawn to the simplicity of it, and just the simple motion of it. And it is interesting what you said about it being like, is the wall dragging this piece, or is the piece dragging the wall? It's very ambiguous. Can you remind me of the title, please, Sandy?
I can. And another interesting thing, these are epoxied, or there's resin that has basically sealed these, but they're paper boats. And the piece is called Involuntary Voyage. And again, thinking about the times in which we're living, you know, this is kind of, it's funny because when we put the show call up, and we had a clear message about the show, but then as anything, you know, there are all these cultural shifts that happen. And so the meaning of the work in so many ways ends up shifting with the times, which I think is interesting about art. I think it's because of that ambiguity. She says she's investigating the notion of being lost physically, emotionally, and psychologically. Okay. She says we all have somewhere, whether it be a tangible space or maybe even a memory, where we feel we are safe and belong. How do we find that place? Where do we look? And how long is the journey? Some may have the ability to leave an area or mindset that is familiar and comfortable. Others may be bound by psychiatric, physical, or even monetary struggles. Unfortunately, historically, an individual's connection to any of these matters can easily sway how they develop, see themselves, and are perceived by others.
That's a wonderful statement, and that kind of came back to me as you read that. I have been actually during another show on a panel of jurors. I wasn't a single juror this last couple of weeks, and so I have so much information in my brain and different artist statements and artists in my brain right now. So I couldn't pull them all up, but I remember reading that statement, and it's just a very beautiful, well-written statement too, and adds so much to the physical piece. Yeah.
It does. Okay, so now I'm gonna take you, hi guys, take you into my office. And I've pointed the camera on me now because you don't want to see my messy office.
Oh, yes, you do. People feel really good to see your messy office, Sandy.
I know, they'll feel like it's okay. It's okay to have messy things happen, but we're busy here, so I have a good excuse. And it's kind of interesting because we are busy, even though, you know, our doors are closed. We're still doing these kind of virtual tours and shows and all that stuff. But Tally, I loved the show. I loved the pieces that you picked for the show. And I guess I'm going to ask a question. I'll ask you a couple questions, if that's okay with you. Thank you for being with us today and being willing to share your thoughts on this particular exhibit. And I'm just going to share for everybody who doesn't know that this show is called Intersections, and it explores the convergence of human invention, society, culture, and the natural world. We left that very wide open for interpretation because oftentimes artists are working in big themes and in universal themes. And we really wanted this to be an opportunity to see a lot of different work with people thinking about the natural world, about society, about culture. And it's what we got. So good job, Tally. And maybe you can tell me a little bit about the jury process. Like, how did that go for you? Is that something that you've done a lot of before? Tell us a little bit about your experience with jurying.
I've done a little bit of jury before, but it's been a while. And it just so happens that in this last month, I've juried 2 shows. I've been on a panel of 4 jurors for an art center. And then this show, I've juried a printmaking show before. But I haven't done, so that's maybe 4 different juries, 5 different juries I've done. But I really enjoyed it. Seeing the work, all the different varieties of work. And it was hard in the beginning. I looked through everything, just kind of went through all the images, and I made the first cut of images. Some work didn't really pertain to the theme in any sort of apparent way. Those were just a few of the pieces. And then some of them, the pieces that the photographs, there was only a few, I'd say, but the photographs were not very good. Those were out. So I narrowed it down a little bit, but I really went with my gut reaction for the first elimination. And then I started looking more closely at each artist. And after I did the major cut, got about, I think it was 42 artists that I chose. I started researching them so I could see their larger bodies of work. And that was really interesting, although I really didn't do that before I chose them. And like I mentioned before, I don't know how much of this is edited. It's very hard to see some pieces, to get a perspective on some pieces, all online, especially some of the more sculptural, textural pieces. But so I had to kind of, zero in the detail and use my imagination. So that, of course, most shows are juried digitally now, almost all of them. But that's always a bit challenging because that you're not feeling the presence of the piece sometimes. So going through in the gallery with you, Sandy, was really affirming, because there wasn't one piece where I said, oh my God, why did I choose that? I really was happy to see all those pieces, and I could really see them just because it was sort of more 3-dimensional. Even though we're dealing with a flat screen, I could see them in the space and see them sort of in conversation with each other. And I've entered a lot of juried shows, and it's always a crapshoot, really. You just never know. You never know what's going to happen, or how someone's going to see your work, or if they're just going to look at it once and flip through it and not even, consider it. I mean, sometimes, you can enter a juried show and there's 600 entries. And that's just, it's crazy. That's a lot for one person to look at. But I really enjoyed the process. I think there was, how many different artists were there in this show?
There were 180 pieces that were submitted.
Right.
Some people submitted 3 pieces, some people submitted 1. So we had under 100 people, I think about 80 people submitted to the show, right. Which is something that
because COVID happened right in the middle of this call, that the numbers sort of dropped off at that point. And then right before we closed, I think we extended the deadline, but right before we extended the deadline, then we got quite a bit more, because then people were in quarantine. And as you know, artists are making work. Like, this was no different for them. They just had a bigger excuse to be in the studio a little bit longer. So,
right.
Yeah, about 80 people, to answer your question.
Right. And so I'm glad it wasn't, 600 or even 200.
I'm glad.
Because the choices were hard to make, And so, and like I said in my juror's statement, everyone that entered the show, everyone that it's not easy to make art, and then it's not easy to present it to the world sometimes. And so, I really applaud everyone that entered, and everyone that made artwork. And, if your piece wasn't selected, that's just, I get rejected a lot. It's just the way it is. The more you, I think if you're not getting many rejection notices, you're not putting yourself out there enough, basically. So
I see that too, Talia.
Yay for rejections.
So you had mentioned just a minute ago, it's a crapshoot. Jurors have different set of criteria. They've got a guideline. The gallery directors, what we do is we give you those guidelines. Here's what we're looking at in terms of subject matter. But then there's you, the juror, who's bringing a set of criteria to the table. And can I ask you, what are some of the things you're thinking about when you're jurying work? What determines whether a piece makes it into the show or doesn't make it into the show? If you could talk a little bit about that.
Right. So I think that when I look at a piece, I'm trying to think, what I think of is how much subtlety is involved, on how many different levels is this piece working? Is it, oh gosh, that's such a good question. I look at, of course, how the piece fits the theme, is it something I've seen before? Is it something that's just borrowed and reworked? All artists borrow and rework things. We all do that. But, is it a unique statement? Is it something that is a unique vision? And also the quality of the craftsmanship, which is often hard to see on a flat digital screen, but I think you can get a sense of that, of judging that, even sort of zeroing in on the detail. But, I think craftsmanship is really important. How does the craftsmanship support the conceptual ideas? And because if something is, there needs to be care and thoughtfulness in making a piece on so many different levels. So I look at that, and I think a lot of it is gut reaction, and like how long do I want to look at this piece? Am I going to go back to this piece and look at it again, or do I just see everything just when it flashes on the screen? Sometimes an image would just flash on the screen, and I would just think, this isn't interesting me. This isn't holding my interest. It's not, I've seen this before, so I think the uniqueness of an artist's vision is really important. And, oftentimes I would read an artist's statement, and I would get more insight into the work, and I would look at it again, and then I would come back and look at it again. So it was really, the jurying process was long for me. I really spent a lot of time, going back. And I think that I took a lot of breaks when I was jurying too. Like, I tend to set the timer on my phone for 25 minutes because I think my brain works really well for about 25 minutes. Then I need like a 5-minute break or something, so that I have fresh eyes. And I think coming back to the work over and over again, then it was easier for me to tell, oh, is this piece really interesting? Does it speak to me in a way that what is it saying? Is it saying something that is relevant and pertains to the theme in a sort of unique, multi-layered way? That makes sense.
Yeah, it sounds like there's an investigative process in there somewhere for you, visually, really investigating, time and attention to detail and all of those things. And I wonder what you do when you want to find out more about a piece. Do you actually, if you're looking, in cafe and you're looking at the images, if there's a piece, because especially when you're looking at a juried show, you're only seeing one piece of that artist's work.
Okay.
What happens for you? Where do you go and what do you do to investigate further if you feel compelled?
Right. So a lot of the work, when I sort of narrowed it down quite a bit, I would look at websites of various artists to see a larger body of work, and then I could get a sense of what their work was about, because it's very difficult when you see 1, 2, 3 pieces of an artist. If you go to their website and you see a range of works, you see their current work, you see their work from 4 or 5 years ago, maybe from 10 years ago, or various projects that they're doing. I think that really expands my appreciation for an artist. And so I did do, a lot of that. And especially the artists that I was very curious about. I did a lot of that investigation.
That's great. Are there any works in there? They all stand out for really different reasons. Are there pieces in there that you want to talk about a little bit more, or want to maybe learn about a little bit more? Mm-hmm. I guess part of picking pieces for a show is that there is that compelling interest that you have in the work. Mm-hmm. Maybe you can talk about a couple of the works that a little bit further that you responded to.
Right. Well, let's see. We went through them. So the artist, I think his name was, let's see, Everett Cane. Right. So his work, dealing with very uncomfortable emotions and in some cases surveillance and torture. I was really interested in his work, and I still am interested in finding out more about it.
What is his name, Tally? I'm sorry.
Cane, Everett Cane. Let's see. Is it Everett Cane? Yes.
Got it. Everett Cane. Okay, I'm just.
Yeah, and he is someone that I think was like sort of challenging and difficult for me to look at on one level, and so I think because of that, I was compelled to find out more about his work, and and also not being a photographer, technically I don't know a lot about what he does. I don't understand his process, and a lot of it. So he's one person.
Mm-hmm. Can we read his statement so we can understand a little bit more? Yeah. I don't know how much of the statements are going to be out. I'm hoping to get those out to people, but he does have an interesting statement. And Tally, you're correct. He's from New York. It doesn't say whether he's from Manhattan, and I wouldn't know if he was by the zip code. But he says, my works examine cultural madness, media distortion, surveillance, censorship, torture, emotion, and animal cruelty through hybridized subjects who have been flayed by the brutalities of life. So these are dark things, drawing influences from the Viennese actionists, really interesting stuff, the German expressionism, Paul McCarthy, Francis Bacon, and who definitely dealt with tortured themes in their work. And the Independent Group, which is a specific artist group he's referring to, the work deconstructs the photograph and cinema still as historical documents while indicting the viewer's complicity in the rituals that control us.
Mm.
So that is his statement, which I think is, is this coming through in his work? I mean, that's some of the things we think about, like when you're writing about your work and you're looking at the work, are those two things matching up?
Right, right. I think they are in his case. I think if you look at his website, yeah, I think that's a really well-written statement.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they are, yeah. And yeah, and other works that really stood out. Well, Kathy Capario's work we've talked about, and Renee Couture's, and Elise Wagner's work. I love just looking at her work. It's just so, for me, it's really just so layered with science and she's so good. Craft, I mean, she's just a master with encaustic. And I feel like I can just sort of crawl into her paintings. They're so textural and sort of multi-layered and you know, beautiful. I you know, really appreciate her aesthetic. I mean, I would love to live with a couple of her paintings, honestly. But, you know, of course, that intersection of science with astronomy and geology is something that I'm personally very interested in too. So you can see why her work, you know, always stands out to me. I actually did a workshop with Elise, an encaustic workshop years ago. It must have been 10 or 12 years ago. And she's such a good teacher and so much fun to work with. And, you know, I have, since I took that workshop, you know, just sort of dabbled in encaustic, but since I took the workshop, I have such an appreciation for the medium. I mean, it's such a commitment to work in that medium. And it is just, it has so much depth and so much luminosity. And so those are two things that I just really appreciate about her work too. I know she's been at it a long time, really honing her craft. Yep.
It's amazing how you can see time in a person's work, you know, somebody who's been working for a long time. And I mean, this is the thing, is like, it's not easy to keep going as an artist for a long period of time, but if you keep at it, one of the things that happens, I think, and Tally, I see this in your work as well, where you start to see that person in, you know, who they are in their work. I mean, that sounds maybe a little woo-woo, but for example, you know, Elise's work, you know, there's so much, she's so comfortable with that material, mm-hmm. and the way she handles it, and that comes through, and your work becomes sort of imbued with the time that you've spent and all those things. And there's
right.
a different kind of energy that comes from the work. And this is the thing about seeing work in person that you've been referring to this whole time. It's sort of like you don't see the work, you know, you're not seeing the work in person. You're seeing it on an image. You know that there is a gap there.
Right.
And one of the gaps is that energy that comes from a work that you see in person that has been made by somebody's hands. Right. And right. You know, objects have a kind of life.
Right. So, you said about the time. I mean, you know, so when an artist works in a medium for a long time, and it's sort of like the conceptual part of the work and the craft part of the work and the creativity sort of start to mesh together in a way that create this fabric of knowledge that comes out in the work through a medium, if that makes sense. I think it does.
Is that called like art wisdom? Like what?
What
is that?
I don't know if I've got, that was it. That's the end of the wisdom. I don't have any more. No,
okay.
But yeah, and I think that's exactly what you were getting at in terms of the time an artist spends in their work, and they become a master like she is, you know. So I mean, the longer I work in printmaking, the better my work is, just like any other artist. It just becomes like this more of a rich relationship, between you and the medium. And then sometimes you just want to get away from your own medium and do something completely different. Sometimes I feel that way.
Do you take those breaks? And how does that affect your process when you come back to printmaking? Does it help you? Does it?
So a couple of years ago, I was really like, oh God, I just don't want to do printmaking anymore. It's just so much work, and it's just, like I need a break. And I took a break, and I did a couple of public art projects, and that was just completely removed from printmaking, and which was great. I learned so much.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, yeah, I think I'll get back to printmaking now. I'm ready. It's something about that familiar smell of ink and the tools and the copper and the wood, carving wood and etching in copper. Just love the whole craft of it. Yeah, and then, like, I know I said this about Kathy's work, Kathy Capario, but the way, I remember seeing Kathy's work when I first moved to Eugene. I think it was like 25 years ago or something. And it was very, very different than what it is now. But it was so just beautifully crafted. It was almost surreal, these beautiful landscapes. And her work now has that sort of knowledge and skill, but she's using completely different materials and techniques than she used to use. And there's a lot that I learn a lot when I look at her work. I learn a lot about this cut paper and collage, and just how she fits these different elements together. So interesting to me. Yeah.
Okay. You had mentioned, let's see here. Gosh, we had another artist from New York, and you had mentioned this work, and we wanted to talk a little bit more about it. But Lauren Lake's piece called Swath One. It is the piece that, I don't know if you can see it, but it's almost like a diptych. On the left-hand side, there is, I'm not sure if I'm looking at a sun print of a blue bell and some flowers.
I think that's a cyanotype.
Cyanotype, yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And then on the right side is more abstract with some scratches in it. There's some kind of very, very textural piece.
Right.
So one side looks like you're looking sort of into a keyhole, and the other one is sort of coming back at you. So this idea of absence and presence.
Mm-hmm. Do you have her artist statement there?
I do. In my work, she says, I examine the surreality of the garden, which exists as both natural and artificial. Instilling contradictory symbolism in unfamiliar imagery, the garden itself is an ironic place that symbolizes perfection and imperfection at the same time. Mm. I am particularly interested in the cultural constructs of gardens that must be seen in a broader sociological and political perspective, as well as the consideration of gardens as neutral or pure, devoid of political or professional interests. I regard the garden landscape as an analogy to drawing and to consciousness, in that the garden is a locus of the human condition. My current studio investigation considers what author, journalist, activist, and Professor Michael Pollan, we know who that is, describes as messy places where the human and the natural come together. My drawings borrow, she's calling them drawings, borrow the grammar of botany, garden art architecture and agriculture to create artworks that inspire a nostalgic longing to be near again to someone or something.
Oh, that's a beautiful, beautiful statement. I read that earlier today again when I was sort of refreshing for this talk. And that is just a beautiful statement. Now I really want to see more of her work. I'm going to look her up again because I can just so relate to that. Just, as a garden being sort of perfect and imperfect and what did Michael Pollan say? Messy and sort of the way nature and humans come together. Yeah, beautifully written.
I'm inspired. I definitely want to look up her work. And I just want to remind people that Michael Pollan is a botanist and an author, and he's written many books. And I always recommend that people pick up his books because they're lovely. And I'm sure, Tally, you could probably talk a little bit about them, but you can listen to some of his books on Audible. And I'm trying to give you guys a couple of titles because right now they're escaping me.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I can't remember names either. I've read it.
He has written Omnivore's Dilemma and In Defense of Food. And a book, it looks like was written in 2018 called How to Change Your Mind. So she's clearly referencing perhaps the book that he wrote called How to Change Your Mind. But the drawing that link between, and you just did that. And again, I'm seeing your work in my mind. There's this wild place, that exists inside all of us. And it does come out in our artwork. It absolutely must in some ways, either in a way where we get to tame that or we get to just bring it out and look at it. And I think that is very intriguing about her work. I'm interested to read more. This just makes me think you want to spend time with each of these statements and the works. It's so wonderful to read what artists are writing about their work. Yeah. I always try to encourage people, keep that living document, almost like a diary, when you're making your work, especially when you're first starting out or kind of getting into the groove of what it is you're making, that you're constantly writing about it, because eventually you'll be expected to really explain what you're doing. And you don't want to come cold on that. You really want to, but most artists that I know, whether they write about their work or not, are always thinking so deeply about, their world and what they want to see and, how they want to see things or how they see things. It's pretty wonderful.
Yeah. It's great that you have the artist statements up with the work too. I really appreciate that.
Reno Isto, who is working at the Art Center right now, he used to work here before, and he is incredible. There's a whole list of things that he's doing, but he was supposed to be on a research grant to go to Albania, and he is an art historian. He had a residency at the Getty for a little while. He's just really brilliant, but he's from this area, and so he because of the quarantine, he got stuck here. And he's not stuck at all. He's staying with his parents, but I was able to kind of rope him in and ask him to lay out the show.
Oh.
And because I'm doing executive director duties right now.
That's great.
But also I wanted his voice. I wanted his take on what he thought the layout of the show could be and what those relationships would be amongst the pieces.
Yes.
So
yeah.
Reno is in this show with all of us, with all the artists and with you as the juror. There's always people behind the scenes, and Reno has just been wonderful. So that was his contribution to the show, was that he put those statements up. And I was really glad he did. We talked about it, and the statements were really important. And so we put those up. And actually, I think he contacted everybody. We did have work statements. There's a difference between an artist statement and a work statement, right? So your artist statement talks about your work in general. Your work statement is going to talk about the actual piece that's in the show. And so we had to make sure that we had work statements from each of the people. So, you know, Reno took care of all that.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I spoke with him on the phone once briefly. So did you two together lay out the show?
You know, I had Reno lay the show out. He spent a couple of days figuring out where things would go. And that was a little hard because he didn't have the scale of things necessarily.
Right.
There were two people in the show, which we will show their work online, that were their pieces are not in this exhibit because for one reason or another, this was a difficult time, I think, for people. And so we were really lucky to even get the pieces that we have. We have most of the pieces with the exception of two. So he didn't know there, you know, there were some things to figure out along the way. So he laid out the show. And once he laid it out on that Monday and Tuesday, I came in on Wednesday and I hung it for him. And it was a really nice role reversal. And I always want to support young curators, young artists, people who are thinking about work and those relationships. And I learned so much. So I really was excited to have Reno be part of this.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So Tally, this has been really wonderful talking to you.
Oh, great to talk to you, Sandy. You added a lot for me of this whole experience, really.
I feel like we're such a team. I love having this experience of working with you in this way. We've known each other for quite a while, so we haven't been able to work together. And it has been kind of a weird time. So just in terms of not being able to be in person and have the opening exhibit, the opening reception. But thank you for understanding all of the things that we went through to get here.
Yeah, yeah.
So Tally, tell us a little bit about, maybe before we close up, what you are working on right now, and anything, any shows that you've got coming up, but also an address to the artists in this show. Anything you want to tell those artists, because they're watching this, and it means a lot to hear what you have to say.
Gosh, well, thank you for your artworks. What I'm working on right now. Well, I'm fortunate to have a home studio here in my house in Eugene, Oregon. And, you know, I've been working on prints during the quarantine. And I worked on a series of monoprints, you know, like 18 by 24. And then I started these etching plates that are probably 9 by 12 inches. And I just started drawing these obsessive series of tiny little microscopic line etchings that are very, very close together. So that when you etch them, they create this sort of solid color. I work with a lot of color. And so I worked on these plates very excessively, obsessively and excessively with like a jeweler's visor for like about 6 weeks. And I finally got them done and etched them about three weeks ago, and I've been printing them. And I do a lot of one-of-a-kind printing. I've sort of gotten tired of doing edition prints, although I have done a lot of that. But just during this quarantine, been doing a lot of experimentation with different ways of creating monoprints. And the work is, I've been working on a series called Underwater Garden.
Oh, I love that series, Tally. Oh,
thank you. Yeah, it's sort of High Tides Rising and Underwater Garden is sort of the two series actually that are sort of one series to kind of mesh together. And it started, the Underwater Garden, High Tides Rising, it started when I was at a residency. It's about 2 years ago now. I was at a residency up in New Brunswick, Canada, on the Bay of Fundy, and that's where they have the highest tides in the world. Just a beautiful place. Just this, it's called Kingsborough International Artist Residency. So exquisite, absolute exquisite place. Just electricity in the air. You know, the storms would come off the ocean, and the tides would just, you know, when the tide was high, you know, it's just the landscape was completely different, and then the tide would go out, and then you could walk to these islands, and then but you had to get back before the tide went up again, because if you didn't, you were stuck on the islands. Anyway, it's just a beautiful, and I use this word magical because it was just extraordinary place. Sometimes I wake up in the morning and I think of that place, and I'm just like, oh, that place was so just entrancing. We lived in the middle of this 27-acre botanical garden, and it's at sea level. So the garden will be, you know, as sea levels rise, will be underwater, possibly in the not too distant future. So I started thinking of that idea of, you know, high tides rising, but also underwater garden. And I started to get interested in geology. And since then, I've been to a couple residencies in Wyoming and UCross. I know you're familiar with UCross, and also Brush Creek Foundation. And I was reading John McPhee's book called Onto the Plains. I think I have that title right, about the geology and history of Wyoming. And, you know, he talks about how Wyoming, this particular area, especially where I was in Wyoming, was a salt marsh, much like the Florida Everglades. And so, you know, thinking about what this place would be about 100 million years ago. And so I started, several years ago, I started in court. So that was an influence on my work. And that's sort of the series I'm working on, is a continuation of that. And several years ago, actually, I started reintroducing cartographic elements into my work. See, my love of maps here. I did a series about 10 years ago called Celestial Mapping. And I've always had this thing for maps and scientific drawings and diagrams. And so those elements are also in the landscape, those sort of human-made, more mechanical lines and mapping is in the work more and more. So there's layers and layers of these elements, and yeah, I kind of obsessively layer things, colors, mixing, and so they're very painterly prints, very yeah. So that's what I've been working on. Yep. Does that?
Oh yeah, that fulfills everything. And I want to just let you go so you can get back to making more of those amazing, super luscious prints that I got one of your books that you had sent me. Thank you. What a gift.
Yeah, I had I was so fortunate to have the show at the Augen Gallery in February, right before everything shut down. So, you know, I'm very fortunate. So yeah, the catalog.
That was great. Well, Tally, thank you so much. We just really are honored that you were a juror this year, and you take good care, and we'll be talking. I hope I'll get to see you and talk to you soon.
Sounds good, Sandy. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much.